Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that aims to redefine what it means to be an athlete by exploring how movement impacts our lives and how we can all work to reach our full potential. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC, and on this episode, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Luke Iorio. Luke is a former CEO and president of IPEC, which is the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, where he was a part of working to develop curriculums that applied to sports, leadership, relationships, and transitions. Since 2005, he's been a personal coach focused almost entirely on consciousness and spiritual growth. Between his work with IPEC, his podcast, On This Walk, as well as his work as a coach, he has spoken with, interviewed, and worked with thousands of individuals on topics ranging from balance to fulfillment, meaning, performance, engagement, and so much more. Luke and I intersect in so many ways, and it was fascinating to get his perspective and see where he was coming from. We talk a lot about balance. This is something that Luke spends a lot of time thinking about and talking about and works with his clients on. And it's certainly a popular topic on this podcast and something that I'm very interested in, specifically around the language we use to describe balance. And the fact that balance is really unobtainable, right? The way that we often go about seeking it, finding it, procuring it, does not support us. It doesn't create a life that feels fulfilling, that creates happiness and joy, and it leaves us running around from thing to thing, constantly feeling like we're letting ourselves down. We talk about how detaching from the outcome and really finding flow in the process is such an important part of balance, and ultimately an extremely important part of accomplishing the results that we really desire. We talk about how we really need to let our expectations and desires of a particular outcome, how death is an important part of that. Letting those things die, relinquishing the often very, very tight grip that we hold on our expectations and desires around very specific outcomes. And if we can relinquish that and let those things die, that we actually are able to enjoy the process. We're actually able to find that flow, find that rhythm, find that balance. We start to talk about the power of relationships in reaching your full potential. And this is something that I'm extremely passionate about and believe strongly in. I believe that in order to be the best versions of ourselves, to reach our full potential, we need support. We need relationships that support who we want to be, that support our goals, that support how we want to live our lives. And Luke certainly feels the same way. So we talk about the power of relationships. We talk about discomfort versus resistance, and how ultimately there is an importance in the distinction of that language, that with discomfort comes resistance. And how do we make that productive? How do we take that discomfort, that resistance that often accompanies big goals, that accompanies the work required to show up for ourselves, the work required to prioritize our time and set ourselves up for success? There's always pushback or resistance when it comes to how we want to show up and to reaching big goals, whether that's athletically, from a career perspective, leadership, relationships, you name it. Nothing comes without resistance. And so accepting the discomfort in that resistance is such an important part of the process. And then we spend a great deal of time talking about consciousness, the role of consciousness in reaching your full potential. This is an area of expertise of Luke's and an area that he spends a great deal of time talking about and working with his clients on, as well as on his podcast, and how consciousness really gets at so much of what we talk about. There's an awareness there. There's an ability to be present. The interweaving of consciousness as it relates to our lives as athletes, as our lives as partners and brothers, sisters, whatever our identity is, and all of our identities, consciousness is a critical part of this. There's an awareness and the need to develop an awareness that is so important. And where we land is a beautiful kind of final point that Luke and I arrive at, that the need to shift our goals, the need to break out of our patterns, the things that get in our way, can be described as a movement tunnel or momentum tunnel. And we really have to have a hard pattern interrupt. So if you're in a place where you're struggling, you can't seem to apply these things that we're talking about, it really takes a hard stop. It really requires a concerted effort and a redirect to find ourselves in a place where we can really focus on the things that matter most to us, put ourselves first, be the person that we want to be both for ourselves and for others. So massively impactful episode and conversation with myself and Luke. I know I say this often, but please set aside time to listen to this one start to finish. Luke delivers so many impactful points in his experience, both in the leadership and professional space, as well as the coaching space and working with clients on kind of both sides of things. Really provides such an impactful message, and I really am excited to be able to deliver this to you guys, our listeners. As always, thomasendurancecoaching.com. If you have any questions about what we're talking about, if you need support, if you are interested in what it looks like to integrate these types of ideas, themes, topics into your own life in a way that's meaningful, productive, balanced, sustainable, please reach out to us. We're here to help. We are interested in helping individuals be the best version of themselves, not just for one race or for one season, but for their lives. So if we can help be a part of that support network that you need, if we can be one of those relationships that is impactful and helps you be the best version of yourself, we would love to be a part of that. Please reach out to us again, thomasendurancecoaching.com. You can click the button in the top right corner. We always offer a free introductory call with our coaching team just to explore how we can support you best. We are here to do just that, to provide relationships, community support that actually helps you be the best version of you and impact your life in a positive way. So if we can be a part of that, please let us know. We would love to do so. And last but not least, enduranceminded.com. Let us know what you think. Scroll to the bottom, leave us a comment, questions, concerns. How's this showing up for you? What's coming up? What are you struggling with? What are your wins? What are your stumbling blocks? We want to be a part of the conversation. Thanks so much to our community. You guys are amazing. But stay involved. Let us know what you think. Again, enduranceminded.com. And as always, rate, subscribe, share with anyone that you think would benefit from this conversation. It is the thing that matters most to us and the thing that keeps the podcast world spinning. So rate, subscribe, share. I'm gratefully appreciative. Thank you so much for your support. Please enjoy my conversation with Luke Iorio. Hey everyone, before we dive into this episode, I want to take a moment to tell you about InsideTracker. As I've talked about at length on the show, my passion is helping individuals discover the tools, resources, and relationships they need to reach their full potential. It's about more than just getting fit or being in shape for one race. It's about realizing the value in the lifetime pursuit of dedicating yourself to become the best version of you that you can be. So no matter what you love, whether it's running, riding your bike, racing, or just getting out to enjoy the great outdoors, you want to do it forever. That's where InsideTracker can help. As a lifelong athlete who's done everything under the sun, I've gotten blood work done many times over the years, and it's always provided critical information. Even when I was feeling great and training hard, my blood work uncovered critical deficits such as low vitamin D and elevated iron. Despite how your training is going or how you're feeling, InsideTracker helps to uncover specific, individual, and actionable insights that allow you to not only perform better, but feel better and be healthier. InsideTracker was founded in 2009 by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometrics. Using their patented algorithm, InsideTracker analyzes your body's data to provide you with a clear picture of what's going on inside of you and to offer you science-backed recommendations for positive diet and lifestyle changes. Then, InsideTracker tracks your progress every day, every step of the way towards reaching your performance goals and living a longer, healthier life. So, endurance-minded listeners can get 25% off the entire InsideTracker store. Just visit info.insidetracker.com/endurance-minded to take advantage of 25% off of the entire InsideTracker store. Being an athlete is about more than just completing the right workouts. So visit info.insidetracker.com/endurance-minded today to start taking a proactive approach to understanding what your body needs to perform better and live longer. Luke, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Doing well, Taylor. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking offline about our kind of mutual interest in the intersections of lots of different things, the athletic space, as well as self-development and balance and entrepreneur and all these kind of things. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. We don't have a plan, as with all of my podcast interviews, and so this is going to be fun. But one of the things that I am interested in just learning more about for my own edification is your involvement in the IPEC, and I know you did some coursework development for those for that group. And correct me if I'm wrong, you were CEO and president of that group for a long time. Yeah, just maybe start with for those of us or our listeners that aren't familiar, what it is and what your work looked like with that group.
Yeah, I was fortunate to get into the coaching space close to, let's see, this would have been in 2004 when I originally got introduced. And at the time when I found coaching, I thought, coming from the athletic background, I just assumed, coaching was all about sports and everything else. I had no idea how it was applied in life, business, executive performance type coaching work. So it was brand new field for me, and it was a very, very early stage in terms of where we were. And so I ended up joining this company called the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, IPEC, when it was only not even, I think, full 5 years into existence at that point, and got to be able to watch this extraordinary maturing of how coaching could be used to really connect people to higher performance, higher levels of fulfillment and satisfaction within their lives, certainly greater goal attainment. But I got really interested as I got further and further into the field. I got really interested in more of the depth work, really understanding what was it that drove people, that connected them to that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, and how when you got somebody at that level of depth, it would translate to significantly higher levels of engagement, of performance, and of leadership and things like that. And so many years after I was there, yes, I went on. I didn't start as CEO president. I became CEO and president while I was there. I was in those roles for about 7 years. And as part of kind of the latter stage of that, we were in the midst of me, the founder, Bruce Schneider, one of our other partners, Liz, were in the midst of developing a performance dynamics program, now known as Core Performance Dynamics. And it really was around this idea of how is it, let me use the question instead, how is it that on any given day an athlete can show up if they're playing around golf or they're taking the field? Why is it they can be extraordinary one day and the very next day just be awful, just totally off their game? And then you look at the same thing in terms of the way that we lead, the way that we manage, or we perform within whatever our role is, whether it's at work or at home. Why is it that we have these really, really great days? Why is it that we have these really, really low days? And so we got really intrigued of how we could apply what we'd been doing from a coaching perspective very intimately to connecting it to performance. And again, it just kept leading back to that depth work that we would get into. We can get into some of that today. But anyway, that's how it sort of evolved. And then exactly as you kicked us off, all of a sudden I found myself in the, kind of this intersection of performance in the way of both athletics as well as performing artists, coaching work, leadership. I was the CEO, so very engrossed in the entrepreneurial side of what we were doing. All of these things were just kind of intersecting in my world.
I love. I'm personally, as I've evolved and grown as a coach and continue to maintain a very strong athletic identity, but also that has become more nuanced and has taken on different roles. I'm immensely fascinated by the real fact, and how I've seen it show up in my life of that the skill sets that we have often kind of, ascribed to the athletic space
Right.
directly correlate or bleed into every other area of our life, right? And so what were like how did you guys see that um take shape in this, as you were developing core dynamics and these different types of things? I mean, what were the examples of how that work was able to help people show up as a leader, or develop the career they wanted, or show up for their family relationships? I mean, I know there's so much intersection there. What did that look like for you guys?
So if I talk a little bit just in terms of kind of the framework that's here, right? So I said before, there's any given day an athlete can show up, and it's not like their skills are either diminished or enhanced on any particular day. Their skill set, their level of talent is already where it is, and yet some days they can use like the full force of that talent. There's other days where it just doesn't show up the same, right? And so what we started looking at is trying to figure out, okay, what controls whether or not that talent is going to show up in that particular day. And ultimately came at two different factors, which is number one, what was, if you think of it as kind of a vertical, we have this diagrammed out, is that you've got your overall capacity, which for us is tied to your energetic capacity or your consciousness. It's truly literally the way that you relate to any experience that you are diving into at any given moment. And then you've got the way that you're going to engage. So even though you may have this capacity, you may be fully aware of all the ways that you could bring yourself to bear in this particular moment. That doesn't mean you're actually still going to fully engage it. And
Mm.
so you've got the engagement factor, which is a series of different influencers that are things like spiritual and physical, emotional, mental, things like that, that ultimately determine whether or not you're going to bring your full capacity into any given moment. So I describe it this way because once you look at the framework, it's a framework for performance. It's not simply a framework that relates to sports or athletics or a performing artist. It's a framework that can be used in whatever your role, whatever your project, whatever your activity happens to be. And so we actually ended up adapting it not only to from sports, but to leadership, to relationships, to transitions, because this framework allows you to take a look at, when I say consciousness, that side of your capacity, everything we have ever been through in our lives forms all of those experiences, forms a certain filter for the way in which we interact with the world and the way in which we perceive and project out onto the world. Well, if in our consciousness, there's a lot of restriction, there's a lot of limitation, there's a lot of scarcity, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anger. Well, then we're going to limit our capacity because we don't have as many possibilities for the way that we can interact with the world. But if we release a lot of those things and we've got a lot more kindness and compassion, if we're a lot more kind of open minded and growth mindset in the way that we approach things, then we're going to create a lot more possibilities for all the different ways we can interact. And so that allows us to interact with the world in all of these different ways, regardless of what the role is, the activity that we're going to be performing in. And then we can go into the engagement factors, which is then, can you bring that full capacity in? But again, at the end of the day, it's a framework, so you can apply it to performing at anything,
Yeah.
no matter what it is.
I love that. I think, I've seen that show up so much in my own, work and life, and then my work with athletes and then, entrepreneurs and leaders, is that there's this kind of foundational consciousness is a great, to use your word, because I think it nails it perfectly, that when we tap into some of these kind of foundational drivers, it allows us to see you know how we can reach our full potential in all these different areas. And I think that's athleticism, or what I've called is consistent movement practice. I mean, however you want to
Yeah.
engage with your body, is a lens through which we can we can think about these things, right? And I've made the argument that it's not much of an argument, is that if you show up for yourself in that space, you can't help but show up for yourself in these other spaces. It almost like, if you're really connected and you understand what your primary drivers are in this consciousness when it comes to a consistent movement practice, well, you're not going to be unclear, when it comes to how you want to show up in the world in other areas of your life. What kind of business do you want to build? What kind of leader do you want to build? Is that what you guys? I mean, am I,
Yeah, it's
based on your work?
yeah.
Am I close?
It provides you such great context and metaphors. So,
Mm,
for instance, let me go back to originally when I was coming up, my primary sport was baseball. And whenever it is that I would get into a game, part of my consciousness for a long time, I would get fixated on trying to create certain outcomes, whether it was how I was pitching that day, number of strikeouts I wanted, or if I was at the plate, the number of base hits I wanted to get that day. And what would happen is I would create a lot of expectation and then a lot of performance anxiety because I was attached to trying to get that result. So I ended up being like really restricted at times because I was like so worried, like, am I going to get the hit today? Am I going to get the strikeouts today? What am I? And so I would get myself into a place that I couldn't detach from the result that I wanted long enough to just be in the flow of the game.
mm,
Because when you get that bottled up, you don't have full use of who you are. So I get really, really kind of, choked up in whatever I was doing. But to perform at your best as an athlete, you need to be a lot more nimble and agile, which means your energy just needs to be in the flow.
mm,
Well, if I take that analogy of being fixated on an expectation or a result, same thing goes for whether I'm a parent or whether I'm a leader. Is if I get too fixated on the result of what I'm trying to do inside of my business. And I had this happen as a leader where it was like, no, this is the way that we need to perform. We need to hit these goals, hit these metrics this month, come hell or high water. We got to get there. I'd be more fixated on getting to the result as opposed to detaching from the result long enough to be in the flow of the process, which is what creates the result in the first place. And so that kind of, understanding anything that's going on for you in whatever your movement is, whatever your sport, whatever your performance happens to be, it's going to show you about how are you relating to trying to be at your best? How are you relating to try to get the results that you want to have in your life? And when you start to extract and recognize this is what gets me all, worried, this is what gets me fearful, this is what gets me tight and constricted. I guarantee you whatever's going on there in that sport is showing up in your relationships, it's showing up in your career, showing up in your leadership style. It's just a matter of changing some details.
I listened to, that reminds me. You touched on the process and kind of this idea or this construct that we like force our outcome without actually understanding the process, right? And I think I was listening to
Yeah.
an Instagram post that you did, and it was, I know that you kind of led with that. You said in your personal life, you said, "Hey, this is what these are the outcomes I want," and you kind of forced it. You willed it into submission,
Exactly.
right, or tried to.
Try to anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly guilty of that. As I being a very outcome oriented, focused, driven individual, but trying to do that in a way that feels very, you know, it feels very natural and
Yeah.
organic and feels fulfilling. It doesn't feel good to try to like beat your head against the wall and force these things. But yeah, like to back up, um, what's that process looked
Mhm.
like for you? And I think you described it really well in the Instagram post I'm talking about. Is you said like values, process, and death, and I'll let you
That
get
was
into the
part of it.
death part, but that was really
Yeah.
striking language that I thought was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just let's unpack that because I think that was a really cool thing for me to hear because I've had so much of that experience myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me actually start with the process side of that, only because of what you've been bringing up. Um, when we want to create any given outcome inside of our life, uh, what ultimately we need to recognize is that it's the process that we can most engage in. That's where we have, for lack of, I don't love the term, but that's where we have the most control. Is the more that we pour ourselves into the process, the results are going to take care of themselves. And very often, though, we're told, no, worry about the result. You got to get the result. Got to get the result. And that's the wrong place to have your focus. You need to
Mm.
have it in the process. So anyway, what I was describing in terms of the way that I've performed and really the way that I've created change inside of my life was about this notion of values, process, and depth. And so for me, when I started to go through a pretty significant shift in the way that I wanted to show up in my life, I recognized I did not want to force things. I did not want to go about trying to, just, like you said, use my will to force it into existence to happen a certain way. And I wanted to release a lot of that and just honestly be more authentic, enjoy my life more, be a lot more present, and allow things to flow. What I recognized that my values were changing. So when my values changed from being very highly achievement oriented, very goal focused, and now they were much more relational. They were about the journey that I was going to be on, and what was going to be the enjoyment and the presence I was going to have along the way, not just at these particular milestone moments. What I recognize is that as my values began to shift, the process that I was using to achieve my goals needed to catch up, because my process was still very much about how do you get the goal? I got to drive after the goal. I got to do these things, right? And so it was still very much almost like trying to control my life and control all my circumstances to get to that level of achievement. And it was completely counterproductive to what my values were. And so I felt like this dichotomy that was breaking down in me, where I wanted to experience life in a different way, but I was using an old process like layered on top of those new values, and it wasn't working. And so ultimately the process had to change, and the way that I interacted with life needed to change. But the only way that I could get that process to change was I needed to allow death into my life, meaning I needed to allow elements of my identity. I needed to allow even some of the gifts and the talents and strengths that I had. I had to allow some of the way that I envisioned my future. I had to allow a lot of that to die. I had to like surrender it, because it was parts of me and who I was that was showing up in the way that I was trying to live my life that was just no longer true and congruent to the depth of who I was. And so I needed to let those things begin to die off. Um, we can go into what that looked like. It was not an overnight process. it was a, it was a bit,
Yeah.
as you got to get through. But I'm sure, Taylor, you've probably been through some of this. Like when you've gone through different levels of performing in your life, it's not like you're the same, level of athlete, and you can't perform in the same way as you did 15 years ago. And so you've
Mm.
got to constantly evolve. And as you evolve, you need to evolve who you are, not just your tactics. You need to evolve more and more of who you are and how you're showing up. So I'm curious actually for you, if you can, if you even relate to those types of moments where you felt the way that you wanted to show up in life, the way you wanted to perform were changing, and you needed to change as much as who you were as the actual, tactics of what you were doing.
Yes. The answer is yes for sure. And I mean, to expand on that and what you said, one of your points really resonates is the way that I found that to be most impactful for me was when I realized that the relationship component um, was the primary driver versus driving for the outcome. Right? It was the outcome came or this like, whatever it is that I wanted and however I wanted things to unfold. And this is I always have to check myself because I still I'll drive from that place when I'm stressed or when I
Yep.
and I have to kind of realize those triggers. But when I surround myself with relationships that are supportive and I lean into that support,
Hmm.
and that's it always works, right? And when I force it, it never works or it feels awful. Maybe that's the problem sometimes is that it can work for a little bit or work enough that
Exactly.
it reinforces these behaviors.
Exactly.
And so you're like, well, I don't need that, but it's just it's not enjoyable to your. I mean, first and foremost, that's what you said. Like, if nothing else, it's not fun. and the process is not something that you want to be engaged in long term. And whether that's in sport or in life or career or, you know, relationships, with partners or friends or whatever. Um, so yeah, to your question, I mean, there has definitely been a big values shift, and I've had to do that several times in lots of different areas of my life. Um, and a lot of that is it's a bit of expectation realignment. It's to
Yeah.
say
Yes.
the sum total of these things, while they look different, are still valuable, right? There is an intrinsic value in this process, and while that process will look and feel differently, as long as it's in the pursuit of things that I'm passionate about,
Hmm.
then that's what matters. It's I've heard it described as, it's the total body of work, right? While
Yeah.
while the specifics of that change over the course of your life, are you moving in the pursuit of these things that you're most passionate about? And
Yeah.
yeah, that's changed, tons of times. It's brutal sometimes.
Absolutely.
When I stopped, when I wasn't, an athlete and racing and performing at the level that I used to, I mean, that was a brutal transition to make peace with that and to realize what that was going to look and feel like. But, I've since found more joy in the process of that
Yeah.
consistent movement practice than I ever did when I was, quote, fit or, whatever.
Right.
Um, so yeah, no, and honestly, I'm fascinated by continuing to be a student of that process.
Yeah.
I really think that's such an impactful thing.
Even the way you describe it, is something I'm going to point out to everybody, which is a great way of thinking about this is like it's a constant evolution that we're going through, right? It's not, we don't travel life in some straight line. We travel it in a series of cycles that keep
Mm,
coming back around, even though they may look different. And so we're going to go through these iterations multiple times within the course of our life. Some are going to be easier than others. Some are going to be really brutal, as you said. And as we're going through them, something else that you mentioned, which is a critical point to capture, is that we're gonna, like, as we're starting to make these changes, relate to the way that we want to do things in a new way, perform in a different way. There are going to come moments where we're going to get stressed, we're going to get triggered, and we're going to start reaching for the old way of doing things. And we're going to reach for that old way because it's familiar, it's ingrained with us, and we know that to some degree it's going to pay off. It's just not going to pay off quite where we want it to anymore.
mm,
But it's really alluring, and it takes away, when we go to the old patterns, the key is that it's taking away the discomfort. And that's the thing we've got to be aware of
mm,
is it's like those old patterns show up and say, "No, no, no, come back this way. Do it, do it the old way. It's really familiar. It's really safe here." And it wants to invite you back that way. But the more and more that we can embrace those moments of discomfort and even severe discomfort as we're making the types of changes to do things and relate to things in a new way, that's where the real growth is going to come from. That's where you're going to see the leap in fulfillment and performance and even in just general satisfaction of what you're doing, because you're going to get through that wall. Now, to get through that wall, you said something else that was critical, which is that's where for you the relationship, being a value of relationship, which is also very true for the shift that I've made in my own values, is that leaning on support, leaning on those other people who know a bit more about where you want to go and kind of hold that space for you and almost like pull you forward at times, is a really, really critical part of this process too. Whenever we try to change or perform higher or whatever it is we're transitioning into, even if we're trying to do it alone, it's just so much more challenging. And
yeah.
so for us to be able to, if we're lucky enough to have that team around us, lean on it. If we don't, then we've got to seek it out, whether it's through finding a group, finding a circle, finding a team, finding a coach, whatever it's going to be, to have that level of social support in making the types of changes and adjustments we want to make.
I want to go back to discomfort because I think that's a, it's a bit of a popular topic now too. So I want to be I want to lean into it because I
Sure.
want to contextualize it
Yeah.
appropriately, right? I think we get lured into lots of different ways that shows up in our lives, right? And that a lot of that is comes without any grace, and it's like discomfort at all costs, right? Throw
Yeah.
everything else aside. Um, so what has that balance looked like for you? Because
Mhm.
I certainly agree. I think that there is a tremendous amount of value in doses of discomfort and making sure that we're engaging in that space in a meaningful way where it actually pulls us to be better, and whether that's personal growth, physical growth, whatever. So yeah, how is discomfort, what's that look and feel like for you?
Yeah, it's I'm glad you started to make the distinction you were making here. We're talking about discomfort, not punishment. and
Yeah.
and by that, right, is that if we're seeking out discomfort in a way that is not healthy and is not balanced, then it's because we're trying to take something out on ourselves, whether it's a,
Mm.
a feeling of shame or blame or guilt or whatever that's underneath it. It's not a healthy relationship with discomfort. What I mean in discomfort is, when we begin to feel, let's use resistance. Okay. And actually, let me use this as well. One of my favorite quotes, Stephen Pressfield in the War of Art, said that we have two lives. We have the life that we live, and then the unlived life within us. The difference between the two is resistance. And so this issue of discomfort I'm talking about is that resistance. It's that part that starts to really kind of build up because it feels like something new is coming, and anything new is considered threatening. It's the part that lets you know, I feel like I'm not doing something that's congruent for me. And so you're getting like these warning, these discomfort signs that says, no, this is not something that you want to do. It's not truly authentic to who you are. That's another form of discomfort. It can just simply be starting to come face to face with some of maybe your fears and some of your worries and your doubts. And instead of doing what you would normally do, which might be numbing out, it might be distraction, it might be burying yourself in some other old activity, turning towards those things and saying, I'm not going to look away this time because I actually want to know, where are these coming from? What's behind these? Well, that can be a really unsettling and discomfort, uncomfortable situation. But we're approaching it with this idea that there's something on the other side of this that is more genuine, that is more authentic, that is my higher self, my more loving self, my higher performance self, however we want to frame it. And so we're going through that discomfort with intention. We're going through it with consciousness. We're going through it with the intention of maybe healing, as opposed to just kind of taking it on as some form of punishment on ourselves. Um, and so it's just this different orientation that allows you to be in balance with what's going on. And to, I think, something else you were alluding to, it doesn't mean that you stay in perpetual discomfort all the time for the sake of like being a martyr of, look at what I can put up with.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's, you go, same as we mentioned before, go through cycles of it. So there's going to be periods of time that are going to have discomfort, and then you should be able to come out of that discomfort with the new realizations, with the learning, the growth, the healing that's begun, and enjoy that. Work that through in your life, work it through in the way you communicate, work it through in your relationships and what have you. And then ultimately you're going to come up to another plateau. And when you come up to that plateau, the discomfort's going to be there again, and say, okay, you're hitting up against that ceiling again. We've got some more stuff to work through you haven't cleared out yet.
Hmm. What's the application of what we learn from discomfort? What does that look like? Because I think that's so often, and I'm curious your experience, professionally and personally. How do we take what we've learned from discomfort, or how do we even recognize what we
Mhm.
learned from that discomfort, and then how do we execute? How do we apply it? Um, yeah, what, again,
Yeah.
professionally or personally, how do we take that and actually put it in our lives to move us forward in a direction that
Yeah.
feels good, or productive, or
Yeah.
however you want to describe that.
So if I break that down into two parts, is, first is learning to be with that discomfort. And so, for me, I had to recognize when I would get into those uncomfortable circumstances, situations, whatever they were, I knew that by and large, some of my default mechanisms were going to kick in, defense mechanisms, which are around wanting to feel safe, And that means my way of feeling safe was trying to take control of things, because that could control my environment in a given moment. And so when I would feel that level of discomfort or resistance, I knew that that's where like my default mechanisms would go in that direction to keep myself safe. But I also know that that was not always the healthiest way to be in relationship with other people. It wasn't always really truly being authentic with them and owning what it was that I was going through. And so as for me, just personally, the more that I was able to recognize when discomfort was coming up, which has a physical feeling to it, right? It might be a little different for each of us, but there's probably the feelings that take place in the gut that feel like those butterflies. It feels like that anxiety. It might feel like, a lot of tightness that's going on in the chest or across the heart area. And in a given moment, we can begin to recognize there's discomfort that's here. And for me, it was beginning to recognize those signs. And as opposed to closing down in the sense of trying to take control, it was how can I actually use these moments of opening up into? And so when I would say opening up into, it may be even just naming, hey guys, you know what I'm getting uncomfortable. I'm not exactly sure what is like triggering that for the moment, but there's something here that's really uncomfortable to me. And do you mind if I just take a few minutes to kind of sit with, is it the direction of the conversation? Is it what you're asking of me or what I'm asking of myself? Is it, and I'd ask myself just kind of these check in type questions to understand, where's this even coming from? Is this a gut response? Do I feel threatened for some reason? Most of those are all, in my past. They have nothing to do with what's actually going on right in front of me at that particular moment. And so if I could then learn to open up, I could then ultimately see there's a lot of actual, different perspectives as to how I can see this moment, this circumstance that I happen to be in. I could choose to view it from this perspective that feels like I'm trapped, I got to control, I'm fearful, I'm worried, whatever. Or I can say, that's actually not going on right here. That's not what's occurring right now. And lean forward in a more vulnerable, more open way and interact with what was right in front of me and get a better sense of where do we want to go from here. um, Ultimately, I guess, from a practical standpoint, a lot of this was me starting to unearth a lot of unintentional and unconscious behaviors, and unconscious ways of showing up with people in my life. And once you start to unwind that, it's it's actually less about what it's replaced by, because what it's replaced by is just more authentically who you are. It's like this natural part of you just starts to come through because it's no longer has to be filtered through all of the other baggage that you have carried through to this point. And so for me, that's actually what I think resulted was I'm more open, I'm more easygoing. I do show my emotions a whole lot more in just kind of a freer and safer way, which allows me to communicate a lot more openly and freely with people, um, and really not need to control what's going on. To instead just be recognizing of what's the space that we're in right now and what's trying to emerge, and
Hmm.
to be there.
It's such a challenging thing for people to do. It's so, I think natural in the sense that we do it so much. We show up as like an augmented version of who we think we want or need to be, right? And we ascribe that to like every scenario every day, right? It's okay. This is what I'm supposed to be in my work, and this is who I'm supposed to be at home, and certainly on the athletic side, doesn't matter what my body's telling me. This is the type of athlete I'm supposed to be, and we tune all these things out, and ultimately to our detriment in any number of ways. Again, physically, if it's a in athletics, or if it's just our inability to communicate effectively because we've tried to be someone else, when
Yes.
really that's something I've found, it's like as I've matured and as a leader and done different things, I'm like, I came to the realization like, oh, actually all you really need to do is just show up as yourself. Right there,
Exactly.
and it's that's the for some reason it,
Yeah.
that's the harder thing to do, right? Even though it requires less prep work and less management, mentally and emotionally. And but yeah, just to show up and be like, this is what's going on. This is how I feel. This is what this is what I need from you. What do you need from me? Right?
Yes.
Open.
Yes.
But that's a hard thing to arrive at. It was for me, and and people,
Absolutely.
right? We do a lot of prep work, to show
We
up
do.
for
We do.
whatever scenario
Yeah.
we're interacting with. Um, yeah, I mean, what's that? I guess have you seen that when we do less of that prep work? You said for yourself personally, I mean, it's communication, it's
Mhm.
vulnerability, it's I mean that. How has that impacted your life? I mean, it
Oh,
has to have made massive difference.
a massive difference, and I just for a moment, because I love the perspective that you added in there of, you know, us being who we are, and when what that reflects on is us not trying to be somebody else. And we spend this, whether it's as an athlete, a leader, a parent, or anybody in our lives, we're so impressionable when we're growing up and we're developing. And there's so much pressure from, media influences and social media influences and everything else, that we get these kind of conjure up of, oh, I want to be like this, I want to be like her, I want to be like him. And we put that out there, and we end up losing ourselves in the process. Now, combine that with us feeling as if we're being judged by other people, or we're comparing ourselves to others. And so now we've got these mechanisms of defense that start to creep in, because we're like, oh, no, 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 I've got to protect this part. I've got to show I'm stronger. I've got to show how brave I am, or how good I am, or whatever. And we start to shut down some of those more vulnerable parts of who we are. So if that stuff, like, the more that we can let those things go, the more that we can, let those fall by the wayside, this more truthful version, authentic version of who we are begins to emerge. And it's a version of us that also includes letting a bit of our ego go. And
Mm,
I mean the weaker ego, the one that needs to prove itself, the one that needs to protect itself, go, so that we can show up more genuinely as we are. Now, for me, the difference it's made in, I mean, all aspects of my life. It's made, I think first and foremost for me is how it shows up at home. Me being able to just be present with my kids, being, present with who they are and what are their kind of natural, unique gifts and personalities and perspectives on the world, without me trying to say, this is what I think you should do with your life. And you've got to go to this school, and you got to get these grades. You got to get this. It's like, no, that's all just conditioning. Let's let that go, and let's see who you really are and what's your path supposed to be. And let's help you figure out what that's going to be. So I do that with my kids. My wife and I are like that now. Um, so that we can relate in a different realm, because it's not always about trying to get to the next thing or achieve the next thing. It's translated into why I have, a lot of what I'm doing for my own podcast, that I do on this walk, that is so much of sharing what this journey has been, because I want to get into more authentic and real conversations of, this is what life looks like, and this is this winding journey that we happen to be on. How can we make it more fun? How can we make it more enjoyable? How can it be more authentic to who we uniquely are? Um, and I think the only other thing I'll add is, when you say being who you are and showing up that way, for everybody to know, this is, it's not an excuse to be opinionated. It's not an excuse to just say everything that comes out
mm,
of, in your mind, right? It's not this is my truth and I'm telling my truth to the world. No, 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 no. It's not, it's not that. It's to be able to really understand the way you're experiencing life, and to be able to share that, express that with people in a way that's open, and not meant to defend yourself or put them on the defensive, but
mm,
to just be a bit of, this is who I am. This is what I'm going through right now, or this is how I reacted to that. Whether you intended it or not, it's okay. It's just how I took it. So that we can just be, you know, more open with who we are, and less assuming about the way other people may or may not be judging us. I think it's time for us to kind of let a lot of that fall by the wayside, and start interacting with people from this much more, this space of more shared humanity.
mhm. Yeah, I love the I love the point. I think that it's become a bit of a popular trope. Maybe is this
Yeah.
well, this is just who I am, and I'm just being authentic. Well, yeah, there's a real difference between authenticity and an inability to listen.
Yeah.
And
It's,
yeah,
if you think of it as like one of those Russian nesting dolls, right? The doll within the doll within the doll within the doll, right?
hmm
Well, the very, very center is who we really truly are in our most authentic. And wrapped around that are the different ways we try to present ourselves, the ways that we try to be like other people, the ways that we try to protect ourselves and defend ourselves. So when we're talking about what Taylor, you and I are saying is to be who you are, we're talking about that innermost doll that is truly who you are, not through the ego, not through the protection mechanisms, not through the I'm right, you're wrong levels of judgment. It's none of those things. It's just really genuinely, no, this is who I am. This is what I'm going through. And it's not to say you're right or you're wrong, or that I'm right or I'm wrong. It's just say this is who I am.
Yeah. I feel like I know a lot of your work is in consciousness and spirituality, and it strikes me that certainly a lot of what we're talking about is there has to be a certain degree or even a fair amount of consciousness, right? You have to be willing to listen to yourself and your body and and really, again, it's not because the line is very fine between who you actually are and who you think you are supposed to be, right? And I
Yeah.
think we can get pulled very quickly into this. Well, this
Oh
is who
yeah.
I am, right? And it's very blurry, and we maybe have spent so much
Yeah.
time trying to be this other person or show up in these other ways that now we don't even know
Now we're
who it looks like.
absolutely.
Uh,
Yep.
so I mean, is consciousness, does that a first step, or is that play a role in trying to get to this clearer picture of what it actually looks like to show up?
Yeah. You use the critical word, which is actually willingness.
Mm,
Because when we are willing to look at ourselves through almost like new or more honest eyes, that's what opens the door. It's that willingness to say, what am I not seeing? It's the willingness to say, maybe I'm showing up in ways that aren't authentically me, or I'm showing up in ways because that's what I think I'm supposed to be or I should be. And it's just a willingness to start asking those questions, which bring you to a place of just greater self-honesty. And it's through that, I mean, it's that level of self-awareness and self-honesty, that's what opens up consciousness. Because now you're in this place of willingness and openness to explore those types of conversations. And when I say that what you're assuming is that you're not always right. But I want to clarify this, because when I say it this way, it's not like you're to blame or you're wrong about something. It's more this sense of maybe there's a lot more here that I haven't seen. And so I want to see more of the complete picture of who I am. And that includes the things I love and the things I don't love. It means the things that I know and trying to find what are the things that are in my blind spots. It's, how is it the ways that I enjoy and love showing up with other people, and being aware of maybe some of the ways that other people are concerned about the way that I show up, or don't enjoy those attributes of who I am. And it's being able to look at all of those, the whole picture of who it is that we are. That's what starts to really grow into our consciousness, and does help us design the way we really want to be in the world. But it starts with willingness. That's, you can't get past that. Like, willingness and openness are the beginning of that journey.
do you find that there's a need to create space for that? Because one of the things that I, when I talk to people, and be it on the athlete side or leadership side or whatever, there's first typically always a conversation around, I mean, boiled down, just available time, right?
Yep,
People say,
absolutely.
they're just running from thing to thing, and
Exactly.
there's, we could get into busyness and this, that, and the other, but I'm
Sure.
curious, just what's your advice to create space, or is there a need for space to even begin to unpack some of these things? Because we so rarely sit with ourselves long enough to to ask these questions,
Yeah.
and that
You're
feels like the first,
yeah.
where's that space come from, or how do we, so I don't know what, yeah, what's that?
You're on point. I mean, Taylor, you're spot on that creating some level of space for this to begin to unfold in your life is a key piece of it. Um, and so let me first is understanding, if we don't create time, And just like you said, we've got one thing on top of the next. There's literally no space for us to start to look at the events and experiences of our lives and decide, are these really, stacking up the way that I like them to? Am I enjoying this? Is this heading in a direction, like the momentum that I've got going on in my life right now? Is this heading where I want it to head based on the events that are occurring right now? If we don't take time to intentionally break that momentum, then that's it. The rest of the script is already written. And so we do need to create that type of space. Now, it doesn't have to be, taking a ton of time right into your schedule right away. You can take time to begin to build it in. It might just simply be spending a half an hour in the morning with one reflective question a day. Or, for some, that begins with meditation. It doesn't have to be meditation. It could be taking that reflective question and go for a walk before you go for your exercise, your run, your whatever else you do. It could be taking that question and journaling with it for a half an hour. Um, and so it's just beginning to build little space into your calendar. And the way that I did this for myself, and I recommend this for a lot of the clients I work with, is if you look at what are I kind of look at it as like the overall routines and rituals over the course of a year. And so, what are the little things that you want to be doing on a daily basis that help you start to feel a little bit of the space and do this work? What are the things you may do only once a week? What are the things you may only do once a month? What are the things you may do only once a quarter, once every 6 months, once a year? So you're not going to go on a retreat every weekend. That's going to get really expensive really quick. But you may go on a retreat once a year. You may take a whole day to yourself without your family once a quarter, maybe even once a month, or maybe you do that as a couple with your partner, and you take one day that's just about you guys, and it's with the intention of focusing on yourselves. And so it's you can build into the space. It doesn't have to be like all up front or chunked in that manner. Look at it over the course of a given year, and you can start to find ways of building it in that regard.
I think that's so often we try to start, we forecast out the effort required to
Yeah.
get to some mythical end result, right? And that seems overwhelming. We're like, well, if I have to do X, Y, and Z, I'll never get there. I need to be perfect today. And I think specifically with,
Exactly.
with high achievers, right? We see this a lot in the athlete space is if you're, if you're setting audacious goals as an athlete, well, you certainly have audacious goals in your career and your relationships and and so when you're firing in all cylinders or you're attempting to, the idea of small steps seems,
Yeah.
people don't start there. And so, I mean, I love that idea of just trying to just what can you do now to move you in that direction, um
Yeah.
and
And it's
and see where that leads.
even for those audacious goals, if you think of it as what's the small step today, what's the step that's 50% bigger than that small step, next week? What's the step that's 50% bigger than that 3 weeks out? And all of a sudden, it's this progression that begins to take over and build. It's no different than, adding weight at the gym. You don't add it on, tons of pounds day after day after day after day. You create some type of progression, but that progression doesn't have to be a straight line. It can be an upward sloping J curve based on taking on a bit more, a bit more, a bit more, a bit more, because your capacity is constantly growing. And that's the same idea of what I'm talking about is, if you start with some of the small steps over time, the amount of momentum that can build and the exponential growth that it can create is substantial.
I know you do a lot of work as it relates to balance, and where I feel like we almost can't talk about what we're talking about now and making space and and high performance and these different things without talking about balance and people's quest for it. That's what everybody's trying to arrive at some version of it that arguably seems to set them up for failure oftentimes, right? it's
Most
it's
times.
it's equal pieces of a pie that don't exist
Exactly.
and it's hypothetical and um
Exactly.
So just maybe at a baseline, what's your take on balance? How do we
Sure.
talk about it? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you already started to give away part of it, which is, balance is not meant to be equal parts of the pie. Some people have that image of almost like Lady Justice, right? Who's balancing all of the scales in perfect equilibrium. Nope, not talking about that either. It's honestly it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the best way to relate to balance is I think of the image of a surfer, and why I say that is because life, much like that wave, is going to break in any number of different directions at any different times and based on how it wants to break, not based on how the surfer wants it to break. The surfer has to be balanced in the core of who they are to be able to navigate that wave and enjoy the ride. And so for me, balance first and foremost is an inner game. And so it's about how do we create inner balance, which comes down to just a couple of core factors, as I was taught from my own teacher, Carissa, that we talk about simplicity, stability, surrender, and stillness. Because when we can bring these four S's, as it were, into the truth of who we are, that simplicity is going to build resilience within us. That stability is going to give us strength. That surrender is going to give us courage. And that stillness is ultimately what's going to connect us to a greater sense of awe, a different presence that we're going to be able to have within our lives. And so we want to build these from an inner point. And once we have that inner balance, it is so much easier for us to be able to navigate what's outside of ourselves. What's outside of us begins to get simple, stable, and align and resonant with who it is that we really are. But it's because we've gotten so clear about inwardly who we really are.
Hmm. I see a lot of parallels there. I often use exercise or again a consistent movement practice as a way to highlight that if you show up for yourself first, in
Hmm.
essence you're creating that balance, right? You're showing up for yourself, you're making that time, you're telling yourself that that time is valuable and equal to the time that you pour out into other endeavors. Um, and and it's kind of, only then can you go out into the world and hope to find balance elsewhere, right? If you're out of balance internally, if you're
Exactly.
unable if you're unable to check in with your body and listen, and one of the ways to do that is through movement, and it can just be a walk, it
Yeah,
can be meditate, right? It doesn't We're
absolutely.
not talking about intensity. um, yeah. What so then with the internal balance, is there a practice similar um, to kind of the consciousness conversation we're having that we could work to kind of slowly build into that? Because I find people, it's all or nothing, right?
It's-
And
yeah,
they
yeah.
often rate themselves at the end of every day, right? I was balanced or I wasn't balanced, right? Which, to
Mhm.
your point, it's bullshit, right? You don't. It's the sum total of all these things, but how do we start to move in a direction where we feel less frantic and we feel less like a failure
Yeah,
when we have not reached this predetermined, ascribed pie balance that
right,
we're all looking for. There's a
right.
lot there. I'm throwing a lot of terms out, but yeah,
Yeah.
what's the first bite we can take?
So just to keep this all in context, everything we're talking about is consciousness, right? Everything we're
Mhm.
talking about is the way in which we relate to and experience the world. And so with inner balance, it's the same thing. You're not going to have that level of balance achieved in a week. It's going to be a process. So it is the small step type of routine where it may just simply be on any given day as part of maybe that morning writing or a check in that you do with yourself at the end of the day is thinking about, okay, where could I have had greater simplicity in my life today? What would have simplified things for me? And let me look at myself, meaning, sure, this situation or this person could have made this simpler on me. But let me bring it back to me of how did I interact with it that maybe made this more complicated than it needed to be?
Hmm.
How did I interact with something that I could have interacted more simply or more authentically? What is it that I am believing about a given circumstance that keeps tying me in knots and entangling me or keeping me attached to a certain outcome? Whereas if I were to let go of that belief and instead form one that was more open and could just hold space for whatever it is that's trying to happen right now? What might that be? And so it's creating, again, it's a reflective practice of looking at what are these elements that make up balance for me. And so I named four that work for me, of simplicity, stability, surrender, and stillness. But for somebody to look at, okay, what is it that has me feel a greater sense of balance? Or another word for that is peace. What has me feel a greater sense of peace within myself? And then they can start looking at, what are the beliefs that bring that to me? What are the values that I have that keep me connected to that? What are the actions or the habits or the rituals that I create in my life that connect me to this feeling and connect me to this sense? And the more they do that work, the more that then on any given day they can say, well, how how well did I align myself to that? Oh, I was about 80% of the way there. Cool. What are the adjustments that I can make based on what I saw today?
Hmm.
So it's a process.
It's interesting because I feel like I love the idea of of bringing it inward, because I think when you speak with someone, or if we feel out of balance, right? I'll use air quotes, but we ascribe that to it's something else's fault, right?
Exactly.
You know, in like, if I'm talking to an athlete, for instance, we'll use just making time for consistent movement, and if that is part of a balanced life, then the conversation is, well, work, well, family, well, right, we project out, and we blame these interruptions, these things that are keeping us from moving through our days in a way that is in alignment with who we want to be, right? We say,
Yes.
this is something I value, but I'm not able to accomplish it because of
Yep.
external X, Y, and Z. um it is am I is that am I picking up on is that
It
right?
absolutely, that is usually part and parcel to this conversation, exactly what you're bringing up right
Huh.
now. And a lot of what it then stems around is that the things that we point to, we've got to be honest with ourselves about what's the choice that I've made.
Hmm.
Because most of us, are going to we've got certain priorities in our life and priorities that we have chosen, but if we do not reconnect to the fact that they're a choice, those choices feel like obligations over time.
Hmm.
Obligations to our family, obligations to our partner, obligations to work or what have you. And now it feels like drudgery. It feels like, well, I've got to do those things. Well, do you have to do it that way? Did you choose to take that job? Did you choose your partner? Did you choose your family? Did you, what are the choices that you have actually made that have created this? And now, are you saying you still want to make those same choices, or do you want to do those things differently? Those are different choices. And so it's reminding first and foremost that many of the things that we point to, we've chosen in some way, and we're involved in how we relate to them no matter what. And so we need to start there, because when we can start to say, yeah, actually, you know what? I have chosen all of these things. Here's the, 80% with maybe my family, my partner, whatever, that I don't want to change anything about those. I want to continue to honor that time. Maybe that's part of my values. But you know what? This work that I've got, it doesn't work the same way for me anymore. Maybe this isn't the right space for me to be in, or maybe there's a different relationship that I can have with that job or this work that I've got that is better for the schedule that I want to create or the freedom that I want to create for myself. We've got to step back and take a look at, when do we need to re-choose many of the things we have in our life.
Hmm. What a brilliant first step. I so often I've described it as proactive versus reactive, right?
Yes.
And so often we spend all of our time being reactive in our lives,
Hmm.
how we move through our days,
Hmm.
versus thinking about things proactively, and then setting ourselves up to move through our days, to live our lives in a way that's in alignment
Exactly.
with what we want to do, right? Versus
Spot on.
sitting back and saying, well, shit, this the job's stressful, and I don't have time for family, and I don't, right? It's just, it becomes a spiral when you
It
like
does.
bounce from fire to fire, right? You're putting
Yeah.
out, and that's
Yeah.
that reactive mentality, and so many people, unfortunately, I feel like are just you're just in that space. They
Right.
can't zoom out enough to see the opportunity to take somebody's. I mean, yeah, I
It's,
just I love.
it's I don't know the exact example from, because you were right, high performance in cycling and mountain biking and things like that, correct?
Yep.
Right. So I don't know the exact analogy for that, but I know, like, when you're in as from being a baseball player for many years, when you were in a slump, you start chasing the bad pitches, and it's difficult to not see the bad. It's like, oh, I know it's there, and you're swinging anyway. You just keep kind of going after. You're reacting to what's there, and you need some form of a reset. You need that moment of being able to take a pause and being able to start seeing things differently. And that's, I love that posing of reactive to proactive, because that's what you're describing is, wait a minute, let me step back here. Let me take a wider view of what's going on. Let me look at the choices to go after this, to go after that I'm making, and how is it that I can begin to see this and interact with this differently. But at some point, we need that pause, that reset, to take a look at the choices that we've been making so that we can choose something that's much more proactive. So we're working towards to create what we want, as opposed to just feeding into the cycle we happen to be stuck in.
What do you think keeps people from stepping back, from making those decisions? Because it certainly, I think plenty of people realize that there is an opportunity for growth, or there could be some other outlets, but we so often stay stuck. So yeah, what keeps people from making the steps we're talking about?
Until the pain of our current circumstances are, greater than the pain of change, we won't make a change.
Mm,
And so we get stuck in routine. We are, as human beings, we're unbelievably adaptable. And so once we begin to adapt to whatever that circumstance is, we just start running on autopilot, and we kind of cruise in that type of direction. And so then to think about making a change from that, it's like, well, is that change really going to be worth it? Am I going to get that much more out of it? Is it going to land me in a spot that's better than what I'm in right now? So therefore, is it even worth the effort? And our brain is just like, no, stay where you are. It's comfortable. Just, it's familiar. Just kind of keep going. And so
hmm
it's really easy for us to get stuck in that type of a pattern in that regard. That's why we've got to create opportunities for that type of reflection and introspection. Um, whether it is a little bit of time on your calendar each day or each week, or it is going to something bigger on a quarterly, semi-annual basis, whatever, to step back out of your life, you've got to create that type of an opportunity. Because, to me, when we're stuck in that rut, it's, I've heard it described as the momentum tunnel, where, we're just, all of our momentum is heading in this really, really kind of focused direction within our lives. And if we don't want it to go in that direction, or we don't want to stay exactly the same way, the only way you can interrupt that momentum is by really, you need to create a real interrupt, a real stop, so that you can begin to point in a different direction, as well as recognize you've got all this energy that was built up behind it. Well, you need that energy that was built up to slow down. The only way to kind of do that is you've got to create that special time to step out of what's going on. Um, so that, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is we've got to decide, where do we want to go in our life? Are we really, truly, completely happy with what is going on right now? Do we like the way that it's going? And if not, if it is not 110% aligned of this is phenomenal, if it's anything less than that, it's, hey, you know what? Let me just, maybe I take a day and I pause and reflect on what could change in a given moment. Um, that's really what we're going after.
Incredible advice. I love. Yeah, I mean, if we could all just take a beat, take a day and
Yeah.
reflect. I mean, how transformative that could be. If more people were moving through their days in a way that was in alignment with what they wanted, and it
Even to
doesn't take
take,
heroic
right.
effort.
Even to take one day that you're going out for a run, one day you're hopping out on the cycle for the first 15 miles, even, whatever, right? And just take that first 45 minutes to an hour of something and use it for being in your head to reflect on how things are going at the moment.
Hmm
One of the things I'd run across many years ago that was just an eye opener for me, which is part of this. Why do you want to take space? Was Bronnie Ware, a palliative care nurse, wrote the blog article became a book called "The Top Five Regrets of the Dying," and the number one regret is that I had wished I had had the courage to be true to myself as opposed to the expectations of others.
Wow.
And I do not want to find myself at the end of all of this recognizing I was not true to myself. And so to me, we want to take that space because it's not even just about the next thing, the next achievement, the next status, the whatever. It's for us to be able to say, am I truly congruent with who I feel that I am? And when this is all said and done, how am I going to feel about the way that I've lived my life?
Wow. That's yeah, that's powerful. And I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I find myself, I don't want to be overly existential, but certainly, with each passing day, our time is limited. And
Yeah.
am I doing things that I care about? Am I
Yes.
making the impact that I want? Am
Yeah.
I happy? Am I excited? And sure, there's dips and lulls, and life comes, and
Absolutely.
but at the yeah, when I step back, um, I sure hope that I'm able to say, and I work towards it every day. Like, I spent my time, like you said, 80% doing what I care about, and spending time with the people that I care about, and building those relationships, and allowing them, all those things, to have an impact on me, right? I'm not forcing
Yeah.
it or trying to be any particular thing, letting those experiences shape who I am. And yeah. Well, Luke, I can't thank you enough. That was beautiful words to end on. And yeah, if we could all just remember that, even throughout our day or throughout our month, I think we'd all be much more satisfied. So I'm grateful for your time and your vulnerability and expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Much appreciated.